Hello, good morning. Thank you all for coming. I know it's quite early. So my name is Ilkka. I'm from a company called Supercell, and I will talk today about the way that we are organized, which we call the cell structure. But before I begin, I want to emphasize that I'm not here today to tell you that, or trying to convince you that this would somehow be the right culture or the best culture. Obviously, it has worked out very well for us, but I'm a firm believer that every company should have their own unique culture, which is of course, designed that company in mind. So instead, my goal today and my sort of hope is that at least some of you guys would walk away from this room with maybe one or two new ideas how you can make your organization better and the culture better. So I wanted to begin with a story about one of our games. So I think it was almost exactly 6 years ago. I remember it quite well. We were in this meeting room with most of the Supercellians at the time, and we were talking about new game ideas. So at that time, we had plans to release a couple of games that year, but we had no idea whether those games would be successful. And at that point, none of our games had been successful, so we felt that it'd be good to have some game ideas in our back pocket. And one of the ideas that was presented, there was a guy called Jon who presented his prototype, which he called the Summoner, and that game essentially was a kind of real-time PvP game. And I remember people really liking the prototype, but then lots of concerns were expressed as well. And I remember myself, for example, saying that I just love what you've done here, but I just don't believe real-time PvP games would work on mobile. I wish it was asynchronous or something along those lines. And so this is 6 years ago. And I remember that when if you fast forward a couple of months from that moment, then actually we did get very lucky that our games Heyday and Clash of Clans actually became relatively successful, and we had all of our developers tied to those two games. So then we actually didn't have time to pursue any of the ideas that were presented in that meeting. But then a couple of years went by, and two other Supercell people, Nico and Visa, they needed a game idea, and they sort of remembered this Summoner prototype that was presented at that time. And they sort of picked that up, and they were inspired about it, and they created their own version of it. And it was still a real-time PvP game on mobile. And again, the sort of the same skepticism was around the game. But despite that, they kind of pushed further. And I even remember this moment with those two that we had a meeting, and they came to me and said that they feel like killing the game. And I asked, so why is that? And they said that it doesn't seem that many people believe in it. But then I asked, do you guys believe in it? And they said yes. And then I encouraged them to continue, and thankfully, then they did. But then slowly but surely, a group of enthusiasts start to form around this game. But at some point, the project ran into some difficulties, and then Nico decided that maybe somebody else should lead this project. And then there was this guy Lassi, who was super excited what had been done. But the only issue was that he believed that the game should actually be reworked completely, and maybe they should go back to square one and build it one more time. And on top of that, the team had the idea that instead of the IP that had been planned for this game, codename Scroll, we should actually use the Clash of Clans IP. And you can just imagine the amount of resistance from the people who had been originally involved with that game. And of course, Clash of Clans at that time was our most valuable IP, so it was a big call. But Lassi and the team didn't really care about the resistance. They just went on and decided to do exactly that. And what's interesting to me is that even still a few months before the beta, there was quite a lot of people who thought that just doing this pure real-time PvP game, it's going to be a really difficult thing to pull off on mobile. But again, Lassi and the team, they didn't care, and they just powered through and released it on beta, and then that game is Clash Royale, and obviously it was pretty successful from the launch. But then the story continues. So fast forward again, maybe 3-4 months from the launch, and we actually start to face some issues with the community. So they were not happy with how the game worked. We had an issue like what it was known as a trophy threshold. So it had to do like with the progress of the players in the game. Players weren't happy with that, and for a good reason. It wasn't a good experience once you get to a certain point in the game. And then what really pissed our players off was this thing known as emotes in the game. So what you can do in the game is that you can send emotes to the opponents, and lots of players were sort of using that to basically irritate the losing player, and that really drove some of players like completely mad. And those complaints had been there from the very beginning. But the original team always thought that, like this is part of the game. This is the soul of the game. It's a PvP game, so we are not going to change it. But then Lassi wanted to do some other things, and then a guy called Jonathan came, and he started to lead the team, and there were some other changes. And despite the fact that all the original creators thought that these emotes are an essential part of the game, they decided to make a call to enable the players to mute these emotes. And that, of course, like many of the original team members thought it was absolutely wrong. But yet, they did it. And because of that, and most of all because of some of the other changes that they had made to the progression, the game again started to grow quite quickly for the next 6 months. And it's still at a very good place today. So I think this story as a whole is a really great example of how our organization works, both in good and bad. And it's a good example of our culture. But I don't think it's a good example of our culture. I'm not telling it because the game eventually was successful. I'm telling it that, this game together, despite the fact that lots of people in the organization disagreed what was about to be done, like starting from the CEO, many of the founders, and many other sort of people in the organization. But yet somehow the game progressed, and it was released, and was we were lucky in a way that it was successful. So today I will talk about this culture and really trying to tell you guys what we have found out, that what works well, and then also what hasn't worked and what the challenges have been, and more than anything what we have learned throughout these years. But before I actually get into the actual culture and how it works, I want to tell a bit about what actually led to the creation of it. So first of all, a bit about my background. So unfortunately, I'm not a game developer. I haven't developed any of our games, and none of them have been my ideas. So I can't take any credit for the games. And even if I have always loved games and I've been a big gamer, I actually ended up being part of the game industry just by an accident. And it's funny to think this, but originally, actually, for whatever reason, I wanted to be, when I went to the university, I wanted to be an investment banker or management consultant. Until today, I don't know why. I'm very happy it didn't happen eventually. And the reason why it didn't happen is that I got really excited about entrepreneurship at some point, and then I was lucky enough that I bumped into this group of people, and they wanted to found their own game company. And it just happened to be a game company. It could have been any other company, from my point of view. But these guys wanted to do games, and they were all game developers. But none of them were interested in doing any kind of or handling any of the commercial or the business side of running a business, and they couldn't afford to pay any salaries, and I'm sure they didn't have any other applicants than myself for the job. So then I finally got the job and became the CEO of the company, and that company was called Sumea, and this is year 2000. And funnily enough, we were actually our plan was to do mobile games already at that time. Eventually, the company did okay, and it actually was sold to a company called Digital Chocolate, which is actually from here, based in San Mateo, and my job was to run the European operations of the company. Those times were quite different. So the ones of you who are used to, or all of us who are used to dealing with the app stores, I mean, this was a very different time because the distribution was through carriers. And you had to do these separate distribution deals with every single one of them, and it was quite interesting. I actually found this photo from those times. As you can see, it's a very serious business with a jacket and everything. And just look at that phone on my lap. But the funniest thing about those days is that you were basically selling games to people who didn't really care about games. Most of them they didn't play the games, and it was just kind of this traditional sales work. I can't say that I would miss those days too much. But then after that, my job was to actually run the global studios organization of Digital Chocolate, and we had 3 studios and I guess around 200 people altogether in those studios. And so I come from, as I told you guys, I come from this quite analytical background. And sort of, as I said, for some reason my dream job was to be something like management consultant. And so I originally took a very kind of, what I thought was a very analytical and thoughtful approach to design the organization. And by the way, since I've sort of created this organization myself, I believe that I also have a right to kind of criticize it, and all of the funny things and mistakes that I'm going to talk about and the flaws. I mean, those are all like my mistakes. And the other thing is that even if some of this stuff will sound quite funny, I mean, keep in mind that everything was done like with the best intentions. So already at that time, our goal was to just simply to create the best games. But anyway, so my approach was that I wanted the company to be very well organized. So like everybody belonged to their kind of own unit or box, and everybody reported to somebody, and they had this like very well thought out matrix organization, and we had process for every single thing you can imagine, like from creating new games to many other things, and everything sort of looked really great on paper. And most importantly, what the light bulb there indicates is that who has the product vision, like who ultimately decides what type of games the company does. And the product vision was very much at the top. So it was myself, it was the 3 head of the studios, and some product managers, and our small group essentially controlled what the company was doing. And then what made it probably even worse is that then the organization grew, so we hired all of these people and we opened these new studios. Our approach to manage that growth was actually to even further increase the control. So we added layers of management, and we added the amount of added new processes to the company because we wanted to control it. And I've thought a lot in the recent years what sort of drove all of those things, and it really was like this feeling that I guess ultimately I had to have that. I wanted to feel like that I am in control of our destiny, and having everything, all of these written plans and org charts and everything and process, it kind of made me feel like that we would somehow be in control of our destiny. That's probably the best explanation that I've come up with. And we exercise this control through a couple of processes. And I'm going to give an example of 2. The first example is which I think is relatively widely used in the games industry in one form or another, is this kind of green light process. We call it why DCHOC, meaning that why should Digital Chocolate build this product. Essentially, it's a mini business plan for every game. So basically starting with things like, what's the market opportunity like, what's the size of opportunity, what does the competition look like, how are our games different and or better, what's the cost, budget, what are the risks, so forth. And from every single new game, this type of document, probably like 10 pages, was required. And to make it worse, I had this idea, which I thought was a good idea, but resulted to be a very bad idea. So my goal was that I wanted to make everybody in the company feel, all the departments feel that they are sort of a part of the process, and they can to create this sense of ownership. So I required the game developers actually talk to heads of each and every department and sort of to get their sign-off or support for these new game ideas. So these people would talk to the head of the finance, head of the marketing, head of sales, head of operations to kind of get their approval. And you can sort of guess what it leads to. In these meetings that we had about the green light decisions, there was no real discussion, because the real discussion had been before the meeting, and it was super political process where the developers would do anything they could possibly can to get an approval from certain people, and then if there was no approval from a person, then the idea wouldn't even appear in this meeting. So the value of the meeting was close to zero. And also, like some other problems that it had was that, you know, like if you think about it, like I mean nobody has a crystal ball. It's really hard to predict which games will be successful. So then you could make the argument that, you know, why would this group of people have that crystal ball, and why should they be making the decisions? And one could argue that who really knows the games and the players best, it probably is the game developers themselves. Also, like this process, it really favored sort of what I would call like incremental innovation, like very kind of products that are a little better than the existing ones. And the reason is that for you to make a case like what type of product to build, the easiest way to build your financial estimate was to look at what already exists in the market and say that, okay, we are better because of these games, because X, Y, and Z, and therefore the revenue estimate, it's like we're going to capture X percentage share of this market or something like that. And that was sort of the easiest way to sell this stuff to people who didn't come from games background. So, for example, a guy with a financial background. I mean, that's the language that that person understands. But the problem is that this type of process doesn't favor the truly innovative ideas. Like if you really want to build something from scratch, you want to build something that doesn't exist yet, you can't build a case like that around it. And surprise, surprise, we really didn't have many of those type of games like coming through the process. And then the last sort of a problem with the process was that just, you know, it required a lots of time from the developers. So instead of them like writing prototypes and you know, building the actual games, very well building pitches, which of course isn't a very good use of time. They could use that time to the products themselves instead. So that would be one example of the process. Another example is like that at some point we introduced this like monthly review processes, and they were essentially like status reports from the game teams to the upper management, like what's going on. And the purpose was like that we wanted to feel in control of that and make sure that these games are actually progressing as we had agreed, and you know, are still shooting towards a vision that we had agreed. And what really like made these meetings bad was that they were also essentially like go, no-go decision points. So they also were like green light meetings as well, meaning that it could be that your game gets discontinued in this meeting. And of course, you can imagine what happens. Of course, the game teams would come to this meeting very well prepared. They had done all of this work the prior week to prepare for the meeting. They had created a lot of materials just for purposes of this meeting. And after the meeting, had the game continued, they would just throw away all of that stuff and continue where they left off. And at some point, I think I figured out that like some teams, they literally used 1 week of every single month just for the purposes of this meeting. Of course, that doesn't make any sense. Also, you can imagine the amount of frustration that these developers had when they had to explain kind of game stuff and game development stuff to people who like weren't like game developers at all. Like again, like you know, it was my fault. I was the one who invited these like finance and marketing and sales guys to the meeting. So it's definitely not their fault. But you know, of course, they had questions, and you know, it wasn't very productive. And the last thing about this meeting, that again, you can imagine it's a large group of people and very easily leads to this kind of design by committee type of thinking. So the ideas that would go through are the ideas that doesn't get anybody irritated, but then on the other hand, you know, aren't really that great or innovative either. Because like most of the big innovative ideas, they are things like, for example, Clash Royale, that it's something new and you don't really understand it before it's out there. And there were other, and I could have like picked some other processes as well, but these are probably the top 2 ones on my list, which really didn't work out. And the really, really interesting thing about all of this is, and all of these processes, as I said, they're put together with the best intentions. But the thing is that despite all of this, I mean, believe it or not, but we were actually able to put out some really great games. So ones of you who were part of the mobile games industry back in those days might remember a game called Tower Blocks, which was a really big hit for us. Later on, then Facebook just started their gaming platform. We released a game called Millionaire City that got a huge amount of users, and there were others as well. And at some point, I started to think that what really is the common denominator behind all of these games? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually, like, first of all, like all of these games, they had a really great team behind them. Then 2, they were released exactly at the right time. So we got the timing right, which of course has mostly to do with luck. But then thirdly, it also seemed to me that what explained the success is that the less the management, like myself and some others, the less the management had to do with the game, the better were the chances of success. And somehow these games, these hit games, they just happened, like almost like accidents. And I once actually joked to somebody that we were able to like put out these hit games despite all of these processes that we had in place. And that of course like tells you something like how great these teams and the people were at the company. And then I like sort of finally got it, and it's really embarrassing to almost to talk about it because it took so many years, but I finally got that these processes, like no matter how well thought out they are, they just do not translate into great games. And then the kind of thought process continued, and I started to think that if the success truly is only about the team and the timing you can't really control because that's about luck. But what you can control is actually the team. And if it really is like about getting the best possible team together, and you know, having an environment that really like doesn't slow these teams down, so there's like none of this management stuff that it creates friction for the team. If it's all about the team, like what would happen if you would sort of build a kind of new type of company that would only be about people and these teams and having an environment where there is no friction? And what if actually like what if the people who would be sort of the superstars of the organization would be the game teams themselves and not sort of the founders or the management? And what would happen if it was actually the teams who owned the product vision? And then at some point we had this idea that what would happen if we actually turned this organization chart upside down? And actually like it would be the game teams themselves who kind of owned their game. And that's what the light bulb again there indicates. And then we kind of took this idea even further and thought that we could actually think these teams as they're kind of almost like their own independent companies inside the greater company. And then at some point somebody suggested that since this is such a radical idea, I mean, let's not call them teams, let's call them cells. And then somebody asked that, okay, like if that's the case, like what is this whole thing called? And then somebody came up with the word Supercell, and that's where the kind of name of the company comes from. But really the idea here is that there is no central process. I mean, every team can be different. And you know, like that enables us to hire from much broader base of people because you don't have to be like this just like one type of person to get hired, and every team can have their own ways of working. And we sort of wanted to see that as a source of strength rather than a source of weakness. Well, then at some point somebody asked that, okay, but if it's all about the teams, like what do you do then? Like what is the role of management in this type of case? And we thought about it a lot, and really the answer seems to be that it's our job to put together the best possible teams, and it's our job to make sure that these teams have the best possible environment to work in. And by best possible environment, I don't mean a fancy office, for example. I mean an environment where these teams can have the biggest possible impact and there's no friction in the organization. Also, one of the things that we kind of got excited about was this idea that if these teams make the decisions, it probably will increase the kind of speed of execution, but also because they don't need approvals, but it will also increase the quality of the decisions, because then the decisions get to be made as close to the player as possible, because it's obviously these guys who know the games best, and they probably also know their users or the players the best, so it just makes sense. And these days, I think that our organization, it works the best when like I make as few decisions as possible. Like, and you know, we've sort of made it a goal that most of the decisions, if not all of them, they should be made at the team level, not at sort of the management level. And you know, to describe that goal, I've even like start to say to our people that my goal is to be actually the least powerful CEO, and meaning that, you know, the less decisions I make, the better the organization works. And sometimes this sort of leads to some really interesting situations. For example, when we work with some outside companies, like for example with partners, platform partners, for example, like it always takes them a while to realize that at Supercell, the most important meetings you can possibly have, they are with the game teams. So for example, if they're meeting with me, in most cases, it's a waste of their time, because at the end of the day, it's not me who's making these decisions. And they usually don't believe it the first or even the second time we tell that to them. But maybe after third or fourth time, and then they start to see like how we work, it's suddenly they sort of they get it. Or there are like things like just recently when it was the International Day of the Girl, I participated in this initiative called Girls Takeover. So the idea is that this, say, a teenage age girl comes and takes over the job of a CEO and makes all the decisions for one day. So and they asked me to participate, and because I thought it's a very important initiative, of course I wanted to participate. But I kind of pre-warned them, or this girl Sonia, that I'm happy to support you and we will do this, but I just want to warn you that you might be actually quite disappointed, because the fact is that I make very few decisions in this company. But she took the chance anyway, and I think she did the right thing by touring the studio and talking to the game teams, which is like always the most interesting part of my day. But it is just interesting like how this type of way of organizing it changes how you also deal with some of the external parties. One other idea that's very close to our culture is this idea of the power of a small team. So at the previous company, we had like seen in our own eyes that how powerful this very small group of people can be if they are just the right people and work well together. It almost seemed that and it's counterintuitive, but the scarcity of resources, meaning the number of people, it sort of it leads to better prioritization, better focus, and then that in turn leads to better quality. And we saw it at the previous company time after time, and also we've seen it at Supercell. So quite often when things aren't working out for us, one of the de facto solutions that we have is that let's make the team a bit smaller, and let's try to put together the smallest possible team. So it probably isn't a surprise that at Supercell we don't have any kind of green light process. But then the question is that gets often asked, that how do you guys decide what games to build? How do you sort of, quote, control it? And actually the only thing that we sort of control is the team and the team's composition, and of course I have to be able to trust the lead of a team. But after that, it's up to the team to develop the games they want, as long as they develop the games in the framework that we've agreed on. I mean, our dream is to create these games that people will play for years and that are targeted for the widest possible audience. But that's really is the framework, and within that framework, the team is free to do what they want and build the game that they want. Also, we are known for like killing a lot of our games. So how do we do that then? Well, at Supercell, I would say that two entities have like control. So one is the game development team itself, and then the other one is players. So, and the team is in control, in full control during the development phase. So when we still don't have any hard data or metrics, it's the team and only the team who can decide whether the game will continue or not continue and be killed. But then, like when the game goes from the development phase to a soft launch phase, so or the beta phase, and we start to actually get some like metrics on the players, then the control shifts in a way from the team to the players, because then it really is up to the players, and of course we will be observing the metrics, and if they are good enough, we will launch the game globally. And what's good enough? Well, that's something that we always decide before the game goes to beta, and we tell the metrics to everybody in the company just to make sure that we are honest to ourselves. And after that, it's actually quite simple. Like if the game reaches the metric goals, we will release it to global, and if it doesn't, we'll kill it and we'll do something else. This model has a couple of like challenges that are important to understand. The first challenge is, it's an interesting one. I mean, the thing is that lots of people do not believe that this is true. Like, not even after they've joined, at least for the first month or so. Many people outside the company believe that this is some kind of a PR trick. So, people like me would come to conferences like this in a hope to talk about it, and then it attract talent to the company. But and it's just a PR thing. It isn't true. But that's obviously not the case, and it wouldn't make any sense because people discover it very quickly when they would join us. And it has happened to me like so often that somebody comes in. Is with us for a couple of weeks. When I meet with somebody at the coffee machine, and that person goes, "Hey, Ilkka, I have to confess you something that I actually didn't believe, like this independence thing when I joined, but now I've realized that it actually is true." The other thing that is challenge for us, that like outside looking in, there's this misconception about the model. Lots of people think that Supercell is somehow just this small happy family where anybody can do whatever they want and not care about the results. And that really isn't true at all, actually. I mean, what actually keeps this whole thing together and acts as a glue is our very high quality bar. So as I just said, our goal is to create these games that people will play for years and years and years, and that's a very high bar, as you guys know. And then if you combine that with a completely transparent information sharing, so every single team knows exactly how all the other teams are doing, just because we share all the metrics to everybody in the company, and also these teams have to give updates to the rest of the company quite regularly. And it's very apparent how the other teams are doing. So the combination of the high quality bar and that is very transparent makes it sort of a high performance organization where people really want to like always get to the bar and even higher. And as I said, like whatever doesn't meet the bar, it actually gets killed, which of course is always a hard decision. And like in our organization, the fun part to talk about is always the independence. I mean, of course, everybody wants to be a part of an independent team, a small team that can do what they want. The harder part is to talk about the other side of the same coin, which is responsibility. And the way we think about it, that every single member of that team, they are responsible towards each other and to all the other Supercellians. And that's a very, very big responsibility. And it also means that in our culture, we don't think that the responsibility lies with the management. I mean, if there's a problem, we expect the teams themselves to do something about it and not the kind of the management to interfere. And that actually results in a lot of like killing decisions. So like I mean, I believe it's actually easier for people to kill their work if it's not working out than they can when they're in full control of that by themselves, and the decision is theirs. So for example, a guy called Jonathan, I think he was here speaking like 2 years ago about a game called Smashland, which he was the lead of, and a game that we dearly loved, and he was telling the story here in the same conference about how they in a typical Finnish way, even if Jonathan comes from New Zealand, I think they had met in a sauna with a team, and then they had, and the game was in beta, and it was almost reaching the beta metrics, but just almost, not quite. And they had this show of hands that, okay, like how many of the people in the sauna believe that this is the best game they will ever do. And I think there was very little hands, and then they decided in that evening to kill the game. And then I think Jonathan sent this email to everybody in the company informing. And I remember that very well because I happened to be traveling here, and I was checking my emails in the morning. I said, okay, like they actually decided to kill this game. And I felt really sad about it because, one, I love the game myself. I played it a lot, and whenever I went to home, I played it a lot with my kids, and I said, okay, how I'm gonna explain it to my kids. Two, I felt really sad for the guys and for the team. I know they had worked super hard for that game, and then they had to kill it. But then I also felt very proud. Like, I mean, just think about, like, it's amazing that these people have like poured their heart and soul to this game that everybody in the company loves, and it's very close to these metrics, and yet they think that they can do better, and they kill it. So I just felt proud about those guys and the team at that time. And we do kill a lot of games, and we are known for that. So be it in our game number 3 and 4, so be it in Boom Beach and Clash Royale, I believe we had developed 10 games to relatively advanced state, and out of those 10 we killed 9, and the one that we didn't kill was Clash Royale. And of course, like killing games, it's definitely not fun, and failing is not fun. But still, like we've actually tried to take some inspiration from Pixar. They often say that failure is an essential and inevitable part of a creative process. So, i.e., like without failure, there wouldn't be any hit games either. And you know, if you're not failing, it just means that your bar isn't high enough and you're not taking enough risk. And that's how we try to think about it. It doesn't make failing any easier, but you know, that's the kind of our way of thought about it. Okay, I want to like close by talking about some of the learnings that we've had over the years and some of the challenges. So, and this will sound self-evident, but I still need to say it. I mean, this model is exactly as good or as bad as the teams are. It really is all about the teams. And like from this perspective, it's interesting. Like we actually like originally when we founded the company, we didn't say that the best teams make the best games. We say that the best people make the best games. And it took us like many years to actually realize that actually it's not about the people. It really is about the teams. And you know, putting together like great teams is super hard. And to sort of use a sports analogy, like what we realized over the years is that the best team, it's not necessarily the one with the best individual players, but the team that plays best together. And you're putting together such a team, like it's not easy. And I don't know if there's even, lots of people have tried to put some science around it, but still, at least in our experience, the only way to really know how a team is working, it's just to put together the team and see how they work together. The other challenge is that, you know, I talked a lot about how we love the kind of small size of the teams. And yes, there's a lot of great things about it. When you have a small team, you don't really need like any layers of hierarchy in the team. You don't need process. You know, everything can be planned on a whiteboard. You need very little meetings because everybody can hear each other out there working in the same room. You know, the size of our new games teams are like 2 to 7 people. Live games, maybe 10 to 17 people. To give you guys an idea like how small these teams are. And as I said, we believe that all of this actually leads to better quality. And it's a way more fun to work in a smaller team. But it also creates challenges. One really interesting challenge that we actually didn't realize early on is that it actually like, for some people, it can create a relatively stressful environment. So the combination of like having a very high quality bar and then this idea that there's like it's only about you, because there are no processes. It really is only about you and the team, of course. And then that combined with a small team size, so you know everybody basically is designing the game, and you know, there are very little like specialization in the team. So that combination like can become stressful, and you know we've actually done quite a lot of work to like make that stress go away, but that's a hard thing to do. And then the other thing that is a challenge for us, and I don't think we have been very good at solving this so far, is that how do we kind of create content fast enough for our players given the small size of the team. Another double-edged sword is you know, this idea that you have very little like visible structure. And again, there's like tons of things that we love about it, but the challenge that comes is that it sort of may seem chaotic. Like especially early on, and you know we have had learned quite a lot of lessons. For example, about onboarding. Like many years back, say 4 years back, it was probably like really difficult to join Supercell because you would just come in and somebody might, in the best case, show there's your seat and give you the laptop, but then you know then you're on your own. But then finally we realized that we really have to invest to this, and now we are like. Way better at that. But you know, like in certain places, you have to have structure, and it's especially important for the new people. Sometimes people ask. I mean, we still don't have any HR, so we do have recruiting, and of course we have office people and admin people, but we don't have like HR people. And people ask that if people and the teams are so important to Supercell, like why on earth don't you have HR person or somebody who's responsible for HR? And my response always is that, well, that is exactly because people are so important to us. So I don't believe that you can somehow outsource HR to a third person. I mean, if there are any kind of HR issues, we want them to be dealt with between the lead and that person themselves. We don't want to have like a kind of third people involved there. but it creates some challenges at times. Also, as I'm sure you've already figured out, like it's almost impossible to reach consensus in a culture like ours. And you know, like many of our games, I would say most of our games, we have like four games, have faced like strong kind of, I would call it almost like internal opposition, or people who have just like disagreed and about the direction of the game, and you know, have thought that we shouldn't even be building this game in the first place, and just talk about Clash Royale and all the twists and turns. The other example could be a game called Boom Beach, was our game number 3. I still remember this meeting there. Myself and all the game leads, so every leader of a game team sat, including the lead of a Boom Beach, and we had a like very heated discussion about Boom Beach, and people were not happy about it at the time. And then we like again had a show of hands that okay, how many people believe that this game should be killed, and every single person in that room, with the exception of a Boom Beach lead, wanted to kill that game. And then we had this really interesting discussion that okay, like all of us except you, like all of us, we want to kill this game and we don't believe in it. But then again, like if we now kill it, like at the same time, not only do we kill the game, but we will also kill the culture. Because I mean, after that, you know, we couldn't say that Supercell is all about these small and independent teams who like are responsibility. And if we make this decision to kill this game, all of a sudden the responsibility, it's not with the team anymore, it shifts to us, because then it would have been us who make the call. And then, you know, we decided that okay, out of these two options, like we are here for the long term, and culture is so important. So you know, you guys should just do the game. And then again, thankfully they did, and it's been a big hit for us. So we tried to like, and we borrowed this from Jeff Bezos from Amazon, this phrase that disagree and commit. But you know, like we tried to like enforce this idea that even if you disagree, you can still sort of stand behind the decision. And you know, and the reason why you can stand behind the decision is that you trust the team who has made that decision, even if you disagree. So that's how we can think about it these days. But still, we have these heated discussions, and I think they're really good and essential part of the culture. The last learning is this one. It really is interesting, but this traditional approach, and by traditional approach, I'm talking about stuff like desire to do like top-down management, desire to control stuff like from outside the team, desire to create rules and processes, and in all the stuff that I just talked about. It's almost like gravity. Like you know, it sort of pulls you like all the time like towards it, and you have to like almost fight back like every single day that it doesn't happen, and it happens in all kinds of situations, and the interesting thing is that like fighting this, it gets harder and harder the more successful you are. And like for example, in our case, like the more successful we've become, because we've obviously been like ridiculously lucky, like in with our 4 games. But the more successful these games have become, like there's always like this some kind of pressure and natural kind of instinct to do even more stuff and grow the team sizes, and there are all kinds of opportunities that you need to say no to, and we have to really like push ourselves to be always like saying no to all kinds of things so that we could stay laser focused on the games. Also, what's even harder is that you know it's easy to talk about this stuff when things are going well, but then things aren't going well. It's way harder. Because there's this like thing that comes to you that this kind of pressure to kind of get the control back from the teams and give it to some other people. There will be people who will say that okay, we'll come and we'll fix it for you, and you know lots of like opinionated people as I guess most of the great game developers are. So there's really strong opinions, and we really have to fight strongly against this idea that, for example, that there are like some really great people in the organization who've done like great work, hit games before, and if they feel strongly about the game that they are not part of, like who gets to decide? And we've always taken the kind of side of the team, and we've tried to resist the temptation to give like control to some people outside the team. But it's sort of a discussion that we have like surprisingly often, and as I said, it gets even harder when things aren't going that well. Also, like you really have to like be strong in this situation where the rest of the organization like completely disagrees with the team, and then somehow you have to create an environment where, first of all, like we believe that ideas get much better when they're challenged. So on one hand, you really want to facilitate that type of really honest, even brutally honest feedback, but at the same time, you have to be very clear that nobody outside the team has any authority over the game. It really is the team's decision, like whether you like it or not. And and it's interesting, like this is the same case with almost all of our games, and even Brawl Stars, which is currently in beta, it's the latest example. So lots of people at Supercell didn't like the controls, they didn't like the art style, they maybe even didn't like the game genre, they don't believe that this type of like twitchy action game even belongs to mobile. But yet, the team like really believes in the game, and of course, like it's in our culture to like give them the possibility to create the game, put it out, and work with the players to make it a success. And we try to create this environment where you don't ever need to create a proposal about anything. I mean, you can just do it, and we just think that in our culture, where nobody like hopefully creates any kind of internal proposals about anything. I mean, the minute somebody like proposes to do a proposal, they say, no, you don't, I don't need to see it. I mean, here's my feedback, and you just do it and prove that it works. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and if it doesn't, that's fine. And then like the last thing I want to say about this, that it also gets harder in case of mistakes. So say that there's a big failure, or we do a big mistake, and we do many failures. We fail all the time. And that I think it's, as I said, it's an essential part of the creative process. But then the natural human kind of instinct in case of failures and in mistakes is but okay, let's not do this again. Let's create this rule or process that will prevent this from happening again. And we always have to remind ourselves that, hey, like people, like let's remember like the kind of foundation of the company. Like instead of rules, we believe in trusting the people and their common sense. And like the more we grow, actually the less rules we should have as a company. But again, there's like this temptation always to take that path. So I want to close by saying two things, really. The first one is that I want to emphasize that despite everything that I just said, I mean, culture has not created our 4-hit games. I mean, all the credit, it really does belong to the teams behind these games, and culture has been an enabler at most, and it really is all about the teams. And for example, the story about Clash Royale that I just told you, I mean, that would not have happened without those people, those amazing people who were part of that journey and contributed to the game. And again, the role of the culture is just to enable these people and enable these teams to do exactly that. And then, of course, there's always that element of luck that it's related to timing that's in the play. The other thing I wanted to say is that like how I personally have started to think about culture is that it's almost like how I'd like to think about our games. So I believe that our games should be getting better like every single month. And as I said, our dream is that people will play our games after years, if not after decades. And sort of in a way, our games are never complete. And in the very same way, I believe that culture is never complete either. Like it can always evolve, and it can and it should get better. And I think we are a good example. So our culture has evolved on many different respects, and I do believe it is getting better. It can and it has to get better over years. Okay, that was it. As I said in the beginning, I hope you got some new ideas. At least some of you got some new ideas out of this talk. Thank you very much. I think we have time for a few questions. please.
Hi again, Ilkka. I had the privilege of working with Ilkka along with, at Digital Chocolate. He indeed gave his best to make it a good place, and I think at Supercell you have innovated team structures in a different way compared to how we were operating at Digital Chocolate, and you have seen excellent results. Congratulations on that. So my question is, at Digital Chocolate, while you were making dozens of games, Supercell, you made very few of them. So why was the shift from many to few?
Well, I think the thing that I've learned a very hard way over the years, and I think many people who've been part of these companies, is the importance of focus. I mean, games is such a competitive industry with so many smart people, so many smart companies and you know, we are a small company, so you can only do a very small amount of things if you want to do them at the kind of best of your ability. So just believe that it's about focus, and you know, focus and quality, they just go hand in hand.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about you know, the structure in terms of the game designers and the developers. What about the ancillary people that we might have? Let's say the marketing teams or the technical infrastructure teams, you know, the IT and stuff. So is that shared among the teams, or is that also, you know, each team kind of has to deal with that?
That's a great question, and that's an area where I think our culture has evolved quite a bit. So obviously, like when we started, there was 6 of us, and 5 of the 6 were game developers, and again, I was the only one who wasn't. And you know, like the whole idea started from like thinking about game developers only. But then when the model started to work out pretty well, like then we thought that, okay, why wouldn't we take this idea and apply it to some other teams as well? But it really depends on the area of business how it works well. It's like, and it is important for us still that the game teams are at the center of the company, and they sort of set the pace for the company, because we want the company to be kind of led by the creative people. But then for example, in the case of marketing, I would say that our marketing teams, they operate very independently, of course, and they're still trying to figure out what's the best way for this team to be independent enough, but yet of course you need to link them somehow with the game teams, because the marketing needs to communicate the vision of a game to the players so that it's actually in line with what the game is about. So how do you kind of combine these two things? And we've done all kinds of different experiments, and I think we're still learning. But I would say that the goal always at Supercell is that we'd like to all of these teams to fall into this idea of independence and responsibility. But there are differences how these teams have implemented it depending on which areas of a business they are.
Okay, thank you.
I'm curious about the transition of the old structure to the new structure, and I guess the shift in mindset needed by everyone, but especially in managers. So how did you deal with that, and what did you do when people in management positions didn't want to lose control?
Well, of course, this is a different company. Of course, some of the same people, but I think it's a combination of you know, just having more experience. The interesting thing is that I've still spent most of my career in the previous company. So Suma and Digital Chocolate combined was 10 years of my life, and now Supercell, I think we're getting closer to what is 8 years now. So I've been at less time at Supercell, but you know, I believe that those years that just taught us so much how to do things, and then maybe also how not to do some things, but you're right, the mental shift that has to happen is that you have to let go. You have to be you have to completely trust these people and these teams, and as I said, it's an easy thing to talk about when things are going well, and it's way harder when things aren't going that well. But you know, I think there's enough of critical mass of people at Supercell, and definitely not just the management. We have a very small management team, and we don't even call it that way. But there's so many Supercellians at the company who like seen how this model can work, and I think all the Supercellians do a great job of keeping each other like honest about it. So we often say that if you see something at Supercell that it's not in line with our values and culture, it's your responsibility to speak up. And trust me, like people do speak up if they see that something is wrong.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Being the least powerful CEO, that is your aim. So like what forms your day? Like what is your day-to-day schedule? And like what are your what is your vision? Like what do you wish to do?
Yeah. So what is it that I actually do? That's funny. I actually was asked about that question not long ago, and I really had to think about it. So what is it what I do? But so I try to spend most of my time in the people related things, and so I still interview like every single new employee that comes to the company, like no matter what is the position. So I spend time with recruitment. I do spend time with all the team leads, and then like of course everything that is somehow related to culture, like at some point it will end up on my desk, even though I firmly believe that, but it's not, it obviously isn't not my culture and it's not my responsibility, it's everybody's culture and everybody is responsible for it. But it's my job to sort of somehow like summarize it for everybody and figure out what the culture is and kind of keep on like telling that message. And then there's like lots of like not, like very sort of just boring administrative stuff. So like, for example, like everything that is related to like everybody in the company, like stuff like, compensations and all of these things. I mean, thank God we don't do any annual performance reviews or anything like that, those used to take too much of our time. And like in the previous company, I added like no value whatsoever. But so we don't do that type of stuff. But, like there are certain things like, for example, the compensation review, which is, very much like on my desk, and which I think is important. Of course, I feel it's very important to make sure that people are compensated fairly. So it's a combination of those type of things.
Thank you.
Hi, Ilkka. Thank you for sharing the insight. Actually, I've been working with a very big Chinese game developer, and so this is more like a question, let's say, from our president. So let's say we have a super independent, super elite team who can make all the decision and execution. And there is a way, like say, if we can do it here, we can do it anywhere. So what do you think would be, the potential risk that the team might go like really independent, like over independent somehow? How I can like convince, let's say, our president to give us the power, like being a cell.
Well, that's a great question. I mean, then like it's a long time ago when we actually had to raise money and had to be dealing with venture capitalists. That actually was always the question when we were doing that. Like, why don't these guys like just leave and set up their own companies? And I told them that if they do that, I mean, and if they feel like that if that's the best place for them to develop the best games, that is exactly what they should do. And like the way I think about it is that it's just like, we need to make sure that Supercell is the best place for these people and for these teams to create the best games. And as long as we are successful in that, then everything else will kind of take care of themselves. And if you're not successful, then obviously these people will leave if the environment isn't great enough. So, but we do talk about this quite a bit. And really, like ideally, I'd like to think the way I think about the Supercell structure, but ideally it would combine the best of two worlds. So you can work in a very small independent, almost like startup within a startup, and you can do your own thing. But then, of course, you get sort of the job security and some of the other benefits that are part of being a bigger company, and you just have more resources. I mean, we can do the reason why I believe it's more fun to work at Supercell today than it was, say, 6 years ago is that today we can just do much bigger things. Just because of the resources that we have available for us, and we can run after much bigger dreams, and that's exciting for me.
Thank you.
Maybe we have time for one more.
Yay! Can I ask? Sorry. So teams, very important, obviously. Could you talk about how you form them, how they change over time? Do they change once a game goes live? Like how you manage the composition of them?
So it really is a group effort. So what we do is that, and a big part of my job is that I meet, let's limit the discussion to this game team. So I meet with the game leads. These are the people who lead the game teams every single week. So, and that's actually the only regular meeting that we have, by the way. But we have this 1 hour meeting, and we just meet, usually like without any agenda, and we just talk about the teams. Most of the time, we don't make any decisions regarding the games. We never talk about like, I mean, of course, if somebody needs an advice, they might raise up the question in that meeting. But most of the time, we talk about the teams, and like maybe a team needs help in a certain area, and can somebody like move from this team to that team, and those type of things. And I wish there was like more science or a process to it. I mean, because that's the hardest part of our job is to create great teams, and ultimately the only way to really figure it out is whether a team is working is just to put it together and see how it works out, and then if it doesn't, then you can make changes.
Cool. Thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you again.